sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest heartbreak. She wasn't expecting anyone to knock on her door that rainy evening, let alone a mud-covered boy with eyes too old for his years, clutching a threadbare stuffed bear and whispering words that made her soul freeze. "I don't have a mama. Can I stay one day?" If the story stirs your heart even a little, maybe it's one worth sharing or simply remembering. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all and they matter. It had been a quiet evening on the outskirts of Fort Barrett. Quiet, but lonely. Emma Grayson, a 31-year-old single mother and nurse, had just finished setting the table for one. Her daughter was away for the week, visiting her grandparents, and Emma planned to spend the evening lost in books and silence. That's when the knock came. Sharp, hesitant, followed by another, gentler thump, like someone leaned against the door with all their weight. She opened it, confused, and froze. There he stood, a boy, 8, maybe 9 years old, shivering in the rain. His jeans were soaked to the knees, his hands scraped and dirty, and his lips trembled. But it was his eyes that struck her first. Haunted, hollow, like he had seen too much. And then he spoke. "I don't have a mama. Can I stay one day?" Emma's heart stopped. Just one day? She dropped to her knees, instinctively pulling the blanket off the hallway bench and wrapping it around his shoulders. "Honey, where are your parents? Who brought you here?" He hesitated, then looked past her shoulder. And that's when she saw him, a tall man in uniform, standing a few feet back in the shadows, broad-shouldered, silent, watching, a soldier, his face unreadable. "Is he your dad?" she asked the boy. The boy shook his head. "No, he found me near the old tracks. I was hiding." Emma stood slowly, meeting the soldier's eyes. He stepped forward into the porch light, dusty boots, soaked sleeves, and a look that told her he hadn't meant to get involved, but somehow did. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the soldier said, voice deep and rough. "I didn't know where else to take him. Every station's overloaded. He doesn't talk much. But when he saw your porch light, he ran straight here." Emma blinked, caught in the moment. She didn't know this man, and she didn't know this child. But her instinct screamed louder than her logic. The boy clung tighter to the blanket, shivering. The soldier lowered his gaze, as if silently asking for something he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Just one night, Emma looked at the boy again, then back at the soldier, and with a breath she didn't know she was holding, she stepped aside. "Come in." Sometimes one knock is all it takes to rewrite a life. He didn't speak much the first night, just stare at the corner of the living room, like he was afraid it might disappear. But sometimes the deepest bonds begin not with words, but with the silence two people learn to share without fear. The first night passed in a hush, like the house itself was holding its breath. Emma made hot soup. The boy didn't touch it for a while, just sat at the edge of the couch, his fingers wrapped tightly around the spoon, his eyes scanning every sound like he was ready to run. But eventually he ate, quietly, methodically, like someone used to earning every bite. The soldier, whose name, she learned, was Daniel Rourke, sat at the kitchen counter, giving them space. He hadn't meant to stay long, just drop the kid off somewhere safe and disappear. But when Emma asked, "And where will you go tonight?" he didn't have an answer. So he stayed too, on the armchair, one boot on, one off, rifle leaning against the wall beside the coat rack. He slept sitting up like it was second nature. In the morning, the boy followed Emma into the garden, still silent, still unsure. He stood near the edge of the fence, watching her kneel by the tomatoes. Emma didn't ask him to help, but when she gently pushed the soil around a sapling, she noticed his small hands copying her. No words, just imitation. Side by side. Later, she handed him a crayon and paper. He didn't draw people. He drew stars. A little house beneath them. A soldier. And a woman with big eyes. He didn't say it, but Emma knew he meant her. Daniel watched them from the porch. Something unspoken lingered in his gaze. Not admiration, not guilt, but a knowing. Like he'd seen too many children like this one. Lost. Unclaimed. And maybe, deep down, he'd once been one himself. That night, Emma found the boy curled up beside the couch. His blanket was half off. His hand clutched a faded photo he must have taken from his pocket when no one was looking. It was wrinkled and torn. A woman's face, young, tired, smiling. Emma tucked the blanket over him again. This time he didn't flinch. She glanced at Daniel, who was watching from the shadows once more, arms crossed over his chest. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew this boy wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. And maybe neither were they. Some truths stay buried not because they're forgotten, but because saying them out loud might break something fragile. But even silence has a weight, and eventually someone has to carry it. 3 days had passed since the boy first arrived. In that time, he hadn't spoken more than a few scattered sentences. But Emma could see it. Something was shifting in him. The way he followed her into every room. The way his eyes tracked Daniel whenever he spoke. The way he sat closer now, as if testing how much safety a few feet of space could offer. Emma had begun calling him Micah. Until then, he hadn't offered a name. He didn't correct her either. On the 4th morning, rain pelted the windows while Emma sorted laundry, and Daniel prepared to head out to the nearby relief center. He'd come and gone over the last few days, each time returning with new intel, bruises on his hands, and deeper shadows beneath his eyes. Micah sat at the edge of the staircase, legs drawn to his chest, watching them both like someone watching life happen from behind glass. "Micah," Emma asked gently, "do you remember where you lived before?" He looked up, hesitating, then whispered, "The place with the tower and the red flag. Mama said we couldn't stay there forever." Daniel froze. Emma exchanged a look with him. Something in that answer had struck a nerve. Daniel stepped closer. "Red flag," he asked, kneeling. "Did it have a black emblem? Like a circle with arrows?" Micah nodded slowly. "And loud horns every night. Mama hated the horns." Emma frowned. "Was it a base? A checkpoint?" Daniel didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low. "It was one of the road camps near the demilitarized zone. That place was shut down 6 months ago, violently. No survivors were reported, not a single child listed." Emma stared at him. "Then how is he?" Daniel looked at Micah, who had quietly pulled the photo from his pocket again. But this time, when he handed it to Emma, she noticed something she hadn't before. Scribbled numbers on the back. Coordinates. Barely visible beneath dirt and ash smudges. Daniel's face went pale. These numbers, they weren't random. That camp was a cover. Some of us always suspected it was holding civilians. Families. Emma's hands trembled as she held the photo. Micah's mother hadn't just died in some forgotten zone. She died trying to hide her child from people who wanted to erase them entirely. And somehow Micah had escaped. The silence that followed was heavy. Real. And in that moment, everything changed. Emma no longer saw a lost boy. Daniel no longer saw just a burden. And Micah, he no longer saw strangers. He saw protectors. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to let the truth breathe. Peace is a fragile thing. Sometimes it only takes a knock at the door, a voice on the radio, or a face in the past to crack it wide open. And when the past comes looking, even safety starts to feel like a lie. It was just after sunset when the hum of an unfamiliar vehicle echoed down the dirt road that led to Emma's cottage. She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and saw headlights slicing through the trees. Daniel was already there, rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize the vehicle, but he didn't need to. "I've seen that model," he muttered. "Military grade, but not ours." Micah stood inside, peeking through the curtains. The second the truck came into view, his face drained of color. He dropped to the floor, crawled behind the couch, and pressed his palms over his ears. Emma ran to him. "Micah, what is it?" "Bad men," he whispered. "Same as before. Please don't let them take me." The knock came 5 seconds later. Sharp, intentional, measured, not like someone asking for directions, more like someone who already knew what was inside. Daniel opened the door just wide enough to see them. 2 men in dark uniforms, no insignias. Clean-shaven. Calm. "We're looking for a missing child," one said. We've been tracking him for days. Someone reported seeing a boy near this property. Daniel didn't blink. I haven't seen anyone. The man's eyes flicked toward the window behind him. You sure? Seems like the kind of place a frightened kid might run to. Emma stepped into view, her voice calm but cold. This is private land. You're not welcome here, without a warrant. The man smiled. We're not police, ma'am. That's the problem, Daniel replied. The two men exchanged a glance, then turned and left. No threats, no warnings, but the tension hung in the air long after their truck disappeared. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made her heart race. She checked the locks twice, then 3 times. In the living room, Daniel cleaned his weapon in silence. Micah slept under the table, curled up like he had back in the sheltered days, shoes still on. Emma knelt beside him and brushed his hair back. You're safe, she whispered, but her words felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The next morning, Daniel said what neither of them wanted to hear. They'll be back. Emma stared at him. So what do we do? He looked toward the horizon, then at Micah. We don't wait for them. We run first. Even the bravest hearts waver in silence. It's not always fear that makes us question the path. It's the weight of what might break if we're wrong. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't running. It's deciding whether to run at all. They had the truck packed by dawn. Emma loaded food, warm clothes, medical supplies, and a photo of her daughter she kept by the nightstand. She told herself they'd be back soon, that this was just temporary. But a small voice in her chest kept whispering, what if this is the last time you see this home? Daniel moved with the focused urgency of a man who'd lived through too many retreats. He had maps, multiple routes, a shortwave radio he barely let out of his sight. But underneath all that preparation, there was something different in his eyes, something he didn't say out loud. He was scared, too. Micah sat in the back seat, hugging a small backpack that held the only things he'd chosen to take. His mother's photo, a sketchbook, and a single gray sock he refused to explain. His shoulders were tight. He hadn't spoken since the knock the night before. As they pulled away from the house, Emma kept her hand on her locket and her eyes on the rearview mirror. The silence between her and Daniel stretched long. It wasn't until they stopped a roadside turnout, under an overpass covered in ivy, that the doubt finally broke loose. What if we're making this worse? She whispered. What if running just confirms we're hiding something? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the truck and stared out at the empty road. We are hiding something, he said eventually. A child, a survivor, evidence. Emma's voice shook. But we're not trained for this. I'm not. I'm just... A mother, he said, finishing the sentence for her. And that's exactly why he trusts you. She turned to look at Micah, who was now asleep in the back seat. Even in sleep, his face was tight, his hands clenched. I keep thinking, she said, what if someone had helped his mother? Just one person. Maybe she'd still be alive. Maybe he wouldn't be ours to protect. Daniel's jaw worked. Then he said softly, that's the thing, Emma. Sometimes you become the answer to a question you never asked for. She didn't reply. But that night, while Daniel stood guard with his rifle and the wind howled through the mountain trees, Emma sat in the truck beside Micah, tracing the lines of his small hand with her thumb. She didn't know where this road would take them, didn't know who would come for them next, didn't know if she'd ever see her daughter again. But in that quiet moment, with the boy's heartbeat under her fingertips, she knew this. She couldn't turn back now. Hope doesn't always come with sunlight. Sometimes it shows up in the dark, quiet, cautious, and unexpected. It doesn't fix everything, but it reminds you that not everything is lost. They didn't make it far the next day. A fallen tree blocked the forest road just 20 miles from the state line. Daniel wanted to turn around, find another route, but the gas was running low, and the detour would have taken them hours through exposed roads. So they set up camp, not in tents, not with campfires, just a truck, parked in a thicket where the trees grew so dense they blocked out most of the sky. Emma laid out blankets in the back seat for Micah, while Daniel scanned perimeter with military precision. marking every sound in the woods like it could be the one that mattered. They didn't talk much that evening, until Micah broke the silence. He tugged gently on Emma's sleeve. "Can I draw something for you?" Her heart pulled tight. "Of course, sweetheart." He pulled out his sketchbook and crayons, then settled cross-legged on a tree stump. His hands were steadier now, focused. It took him nearly an hour. When he turned the page around, Emma gasped quietly. It was her, Daniel, and Micah, standing in front of a little wooden house with a dog in the yard and flowers in the window. In the sky, he had drawn 3 stars. Above each figure, he had written names: Emma, Daniel, and me. He hadn't written Micah. Just me, as if to say, "This is who I am now. This is where I belong." Daniel leaned in to see and said nothing at first. Then, after a moment, he smiled. "Small, rare, but real. That dog's got to be mine," he murmured. "Looks like a troublemaker." Micah smiled back. A real one this time. Brief but bright. The kind that made his whole face change. Later that night, while Micah slept on a blanket and crayon-stained paper rested by his side, Emma and Daniel sat outside against the truck. "I didn't think I'd see him smile like that," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "I forgot how much one small moment can matter." She turned to him. "Do you think we'll get through this?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked up at the sky, at the stars slowly piercing through the canopy. "Hope isn't a guarantee," he said softly. "But sometimes it's enough to keep going one more mile." And for the first time in days, Emma believed him, not because the road ahead was safe, not because their problems had vanished, but because, in that stillness, something had started to bloom again. Some promises are loud, sealed with ceremony or grand words. But the ones that last are often quiet, spoken with a glance, a gesture, or a hand held just a little tighter than before. The morning mist clung to the trees as they moved out, slow and careful. Daniel had found a ranger's trail on an old map, one that could bypass the roads being watched. It wasn't ideal. Rough terrain, no gas stations, no contact with the outside. But it gave them cover. Micah sat between them in the front seat, humming a tune Emma didn't recognize, his fingers trailing along the window fog. He was changing, still quiet, still wary, but the edges of his fear were softening. They reached a clearing by dusk, a stretch of forest that hadn't seen people in years. Broken fences, moss-covered stones. But in the middle of it, a rusted fire pit and what remained of an old hunting cabin. Daniel checked it twice before giving the all-clear. Inside, Emma dusted off a bench and laid out their things. Micah explored the corners, wide-eyed at the chipped walls and the strange carvings in the wood. When he found an old bird's nest in the rafters, he whispered, "It's still warm," like it was a secret just for her. That night, after dinner, canned beans, crackers, and marshmallows Daniel had found and forgotten. Micah sat between them by the fire, blinking sleepily. And then he asked, "When will they stop chasing me?" Neither Emma nor Daniel answered right away. But after a moment, Emma said gently, "As long as they do, we'll keep you safe." Micah looked down. "Even if they never stop?" Emma nodded, pulling him closer. "Even then." Daniel stared into the flames, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone anymore, kid. That's a promise." Micah tilted his head, studying them. "Even if I get too loud? Or too scared?" Emma smiled. "Even then." He whispered, "Even if I have nightmares again?" Daniel looked him in the eyes. "Especially then." Micah didn't respond. He just leaned his head against Emma's shoulder. And slowly his breathing evened out. A promise had been made. No paper signed. No blood sworn. Just a boy, wrapped between two people who had no obligation to stay, but did anyway. Later that night, while Daniel stood watch beneath a canopy of stars and Emma slept with one arm resting across Micah's blanket, something sacred settled over the cabin. Not safety, not certainty, but something stronger, trust. Joy doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, between moments of fear and fatigue, reminding you that even in the darkest chapters, there's room for light to slip through the cracks. The rain had returned overnight. Soft at first, then steady, drumming gently on the cabin's tin roof. Emma woke to the scent of wet earth and something else, laughter. She sat up, startled for a moment, until she realized it was Micah. Genuine, belly-deep laughter. She stepped outside and found him just beyond the porch, drenched from head to toe, spinning in the rain with his arms wide open, mouth open to the sky. His shirt clung to his small frame, and mud streaked his legs. But he didn't care. Daniel stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching with an amused smirk. "Try to stop him," he said. "Didn't stand a chance." Emma couldn't help but smile. Micah ran to her, grabbing her hand. "Come on. It's not cold, I swear." He pulled, and before she could protest, her boots were in the mud and her sleeves were soaked. But she laughed. She hadn't laughed like that in weeks. Months, maybe. Not since before the boy at the door. Not since her world had shifted without warning. The three of them stayed in the rain longer than they should have. Daniel even joined in eventually, lifting Mike onto his shoulders and spinning in circles while the boy hooped with joy. No one watching them would have guessed they were running, or that shadows waited just beyond the trees. For a brief window in time, they weren't fugitives. They were a boy and two people who had started to love him. A family, imperfect and unspoken, built not on blood but on survival, and now joy. Later, back inside, Emma toweled Micah off while Daniel fixed the leaky window. Micah hummed again, the same soft tune from the truck. But this time he added words. Emma leaned in to hear them. "You and me and the man with the boots. That's all I need." Daniel pretended not to hear, but his hands paused just a second longer at the edge of the window frame. Emma met his eyes. Neither of them said it, but they both felt it. They were already so much more than they thought they'd be. And joy, unexpected, gentle, fleeting, had finally found a place to land. Time doesn't ask for permission. It moves forward, dragging truth and tension behind it like shadows at dusk. And no matter how strong the bond, every connection is tested when waiting turns to wondering, and safety begins to feel like a fading memory. They stayed hidden in the woods longer than they'd planned. Days turned into a week, then nearly 2. Emma kept track of time by marking lines into the cabin's doorframe, Daniel by logging coordinates in a small leather notebook, and Micah, in his own quiet way, by drawing something new each day and pinning the pages to the wall. At first, the cabin had been a sanctuary, but time changed everything. The food was running low. Batteries were dying. The silence around them, once comforting, grew heavy. Paranoia crept in through the cracks like cold wind at night. Emma caught herself checking the road every hour. Daniel barely slept more than 2 hours at a time. And Micah, though still smiling, still trying, had begun to chew the sleeves of his sweater again, the way he did on the first night. One evening, the tension finally broke. Emma and Daniel stood outside, watching the tree line. "We can't keep hiding," she whispered. "He needs more than this." Daniel kept his arms crossed. "And what do we do? Hand him over? Risk them taking him back?" "He's not ours, Daniel. He's a child. And we're barely holding it together." His jaw clenched. "Exactly why we don't put him back in their hands." Inside, Micah sat by the fire, listening. He didn't cry, didn't interrupt. He just slowly pulled the latest drawing from his stack and stared at it. It was a picture of Emma and Daniel standing apart, with a crack in the ground between them. The next morning, the mood was different. Emma moved slower. Daniel spoke less. Micah didn't ask questions. But that night, when he handed Emma his drawing for the wall, it was simpler than the rest. 3 stick figures standing close together, but holding hands this time. In the sky above them, a single cloud with a heart drawn inside it. Emma looked at Daniel, eyes stinging. "This isn't just about keeping him safe anymore," she said. "It's about making sure he doesn't forget what it feels like to be wanted." Daniel didn't reply. But the next morning, the truck was loaded again. Not to run, but to start moving toward something. Something more lasting than fear. New beginnings rarely announce themselves with clarity. They often feel like ordinary moments, a turn down a quiet road, a conversation over breakfast, or the decision to try again when everything says you shouldn't. But somewhere in the stillness, something shifts. The drive was quiet. No flashing lights. No sirens. Just a hum of tires over cracked road and the occasional chirp of forest birds welcoming the sun. Emma watched Micah in the rear-view mirror. He was asleep, head against a window, arms wrapped around his drawing pad. The last page he'd filled showed the same stick-figure family, but this time with new backdrop, a house, 2 trees, and a swing hanging from one of them. Beside her, Daniel unfolded a slip of paper and double-checked the address. A friend of mine, retired, owes me more than a few favors, he said quietly. Safe place. Quiet town. No questions asked. Emma nodded. She didn't ask who the friend was. She trusted him now, not because of what he'd done, but because of how he had stayed. When they arrived, the property was nestled behind tall grass and a gate with chipped blue paint. A small house stood at the center, nothing grand but solid, with a porch that looked like it'd seen years of summer storms and family dinners. An older woman with silver hair stepped out to greet them. She wore boots, a flannel shirt, and the kind of gaze that saw through everything without needing to ask much. "Is this him?" she said softly, crouching to meet Micah's eyes. He hesitated, then nodded. She smiled. "Well, then, let's get you some real food and something warmer to wear." The first night, Micah slept in a bed with clean sheets and a nightlight by the window. The second, he asked if he could plant a flower near the porch. By the end of the week, he was helping collect eggs in the chicken coop, his voice louder, his footsteps lighter. Emma spent her mornings helping in the kitchen and her nights sitting under the stars with Daniel, neither of them saying too much. But everything in their silence felt understood. One evening, as they watched Micah swing gently under the setting sun, Emma turned to Daniel. "Do you think this can last?" He didn't answer immediately, but after a moment he said, "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." And somehow that was enough. Not every beginning comes after an end. Sometimes it starts right in the middle of healing, right when you least expect it. Some choices rewrite the path of an entire life. They don't arrive with fanfare, just quiet conviction, the kind that lives in the chest and demands to be heard. It had been nearly 2 months since they arrived at the old countryside home. Emma finally smiled more easily. Micah laughed out loud. Even Daniel had begun to shed the weight he'd carried for years. But peace, as they'd all come to understand, was rarely permanent. It started with a letter, no envelope, no return address. Just a folded page slipped under the front door at dawn. Emma found it first. She read the first line and sat down slowly. "He's not yours to keep. You know that." Daniel recognized the handwriting instantly. It belonged to someone from the past he'd never spoken of. Someone dangerous. "They found us," he said quietly. Emma's hands trembled. "What do they want?" Daniel already knew. Micah. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, gun resting beside him. Not because he planned to use it, but because it reminded him of who he used to be and who he never wanted to be again. By morning, he had made up his mind. When Emma walked outside with coffee, she found Daniel lacing up his boots. "No," she whispered. "Don't do this." "I have to," he said, not looking at her. "You don't owe them anything." "I don't," he agreed, "but I owe him everything." Micah watched from the window, eyes wide and silent. He didn't understand the conversation, but he understood the fear. Daniel knelt before the boy and handed him a folded paper. "Draw us again," he whispered. "Me, you, and her. But this time, draw the house with 2 swings." Micah didn't cry. He just nodded, held Daniel's hand for a moment, and then let go. Daniel walked into the woods with nothing but a flashlight, the letter, and a promise in his chest that no one would take the boy while he still had breath in his body. He didn't return that night, or the next, but 3 days later, another letter arrived. It simply said, "The boy is safe. Debt paid. No one will come again." Sometimes healing doesn't come with answers. It comes with presence, with small hands reaching into yours, asking nothing but to be held. Autumn arrived quietly. The leaves around the countryside house turned golden and began to fall, coating the ground like a soft blanket. Emma stood by the kitchen window, watching Micah push an old toy truck through the dirt. He was humming a tune only he seemed to know. It had been weeks since Daniel disappeared. Micah didn't ask where he'd gone, not anymore. But sometimes at night, Emma would find him sleeping with the drawing Daniel had left behind, the one with 2 swings and 3 figures holding hands. One morning, Emma heard the gate creak. Her breath caught. She ran outside. No one, only a small parcel at the doorstep. Inside, she found a worn dog tag, a folded map marked with a red X, and a note. Let him grow up without fear. You gave me peace when I didn't know I needed it. Now it's his turn. No signature. But she knew. Micah ran up behind her, his eyes lighting up when he saw the dog tag. Is he coming back? Emma knelt. He already did. Micah looked confused. He came back to make sure you'd be okay. And you are. He nodded slowly, then reached for her hand. Can we build the second swing now? She smiled through the tears. Yes, we can. Later that evening, they tied a rope to the old oak tree beside the first swing Daniel had made. As the sun dipped below the hills, Micah pushed himself gently back and forth, laughter echoing across the fields. Emma watched him, heart full and broken all at once. Somewhere deep down she felt it, that maybe Daniel was watching, too. Not every story ends in reunion. Some end in the legacy of love left behind. And that, she realized, was more than enough.